On a sticky Tuesday morning in early September, Jamal walked into room E108 at Martin Luther King Jr. High School just a few minutes late. He moved quietly, trying not to draw attention, but the way he held his shoulders stiff and shifted his weight said more than words ever could. His backpack was worn thin at the seams, its straps digging into his back, right where the bruises still ached. He didn't speak much, barely nodded as he stepped in and asked, voice low, if he could stay, standing for a while. His back hurt too much to sit. Miss Peterson, who had taught advanced math at the school for over 15 years and led every class with the same cold smirk, barely looked up. She was known for her sharp tongue and colder tone. Instead of a simple yes or no, she narrowed her eyes, erased the board slowly, and in one exaggerated motion scrawled a long equation across the surface. Then she turned to the room and said, louder than necessary, let's see if our little black genius can handle this one. Some kids chuckled under their breath, the way kids do when they sense someone else is the target, and they're thankful. It's not them. Jamal didn't flinch. He said nothing. He didn't scan the room, didn't check to see who laughed or looked away. He kept his eyes on the problem, breathed slowly, and stepped forward. The chalk felt smooth in his hand, like it did every time he needed to quiet everything else. He started writing, one line, then another. Every step of the solution came methodically, not fast, but clear, like he was unrolling a thread that had already been there, waiting. He didn't glance at Ms. Peterson. This wasn't for her. It wasn't even for the students whose whispers had followed him in hallways for the past 2 years. This was for himself, for every time he'd been looked through instead of seen. As the final line of the answer settled into place, there was no applause. Just silence, the kind that speaks louder than words. He stepped back without turning around. What he left on. Their board wasn't just a correct solution, it was a challenge. A quiet, impossible to ignore truth. The silence in room E108 hung heavy, almost like the air itself was holding its breath. The board was filled from top to bottom with clean, precise steps. The kind of work you only see from someone who understands, not guesses. It was clear to anyone really looking that the answer was not just right. It was solid. Jamal had worked it out line by line. No confusion, no hesitation. Ms. Peterson stood frozen for a breath too long. Her jaw tightened. Then, without warning, she crossed the room, snatched the loose-leaf paper where Jamal had copied his solution during the walk back to his desk, and ripped it in half. Then again and again, until it was nothing but shreds, falling between her fingers. "This is impossible," she said, voice cutting the silence like glass on tile. "You cheated. No way you did this on your own." Jamal kept his eyes low. Inside, his stomach turned, that familiar heat climbing up from his chest to his neck. It wasn't just anger or shame, it was that old slow burn that came every time. People saw his skin before they saw his work. Even now, after all that effort, she couldn't believe someone like him could be right. He could have spoken up, could have pointed at the blackboard and walked her through each step again. But what would that change? Her mind had never really been open, so he just stood there, eyes on the floor, willing his breath to stay steady. Then, from the back of the room, there was a sound. Not a cough or a whisper like before, but a single desk skidding a couple inches. As someone shifted forward, a voice cut through the stillness, soft but steady. Jamal might have done it on his own. "Did you even see how he worked it out?" He explained every part. Heads turned slowly. All eyes went to the corner of the room. It was Sarah, a girl hardly anyone noticed. Always quiet, always scribbling in the margins of her notebook, barely ever speaking in class. But now her voice didn't shake. Miss Peterson blinked like she hadn't expected anyone else to talk. And suddenly that solid wall of control she'd built started to feel a little thinner. In the days that followed, The halls of Martin Luther King Jr. High buzzed with whispers like thick smoke hanging in the air. Word of what had happened in room E108 traveled fast. Some students rolled their eyes, calling it exaggerated drama. Others weren't sure what to believe, tossing theories back and forth like a game. A few mocked Jamal behind his back, said he probably copied the problem, said he just got lucky. Jamal heard little bits of it in passing, but he didn't stop to argue. He kept his head down even lower than before and moved quietly between classes. At the end of each day, when most of the school spilled out into the yard, shouting lunch plans or walking toward the bus stop, he slipped through another door altogether. He didn't go home right away. Instead, he walked 7 blocks down to the East Side Learning Center, a community-run space tucked between a neighborhood bodega and a laundromat. He'd started volunteering there the year before, cleaning bookshelves and helping organize the science corner in exchange for quiet study hours in a little side room filled with dusty encyclopedias and second-hand textbooks. That day, though, something shifted. After wiping down the usual shelf space and lining up scattered magazines, he did something he normally avoided. He walked to the staff room in the back and knocked lightly. Ms. Alvarez, his science teacher at school, was sitting at a cluttered desk going over a stack of test papers. She looked up, surprised to see him there without any scheduled appointment. "Can I show you something?" he asked, his voice softer than usual, but steady. She nodded, and he handed over his spiral notebook. Inside were not just class notes, but neat formulas, sketches and paragraphs scribbled in the margins. Tucked between the pages was the beginning of his urban ecology project, his entry for the city's yearly Youth Science Expo, using differential calculus to model how abandoned parking lots could reverse heat islands in their neighborhood if turned into green spaces. Ms. Alvarez didn't rush. She flipped through, eyes tracing every line. When she finally looked up, there wasn't a question in her face, just quiet respect. "You did all of this on your own?" Jamal nodded. She didn't say anything more, but the way she slid the notebook back carefully and gently said everything he needed. That night, Ms. Alvarez couldn't rest. She tossed and turned, her mind looping back to Jamal's notebook. Each page blinked behind her eyelids, like flashcards she couldn't unsee. Intricate formulas, urban temperature graphs, side notes linking environmental policy to local city planning. She'd taught science for over a decade, seen all kinds of students, but nothing had grabbed her like that project. Not because it was just smart, but because it felt urgent, like someone was trying to be heard through the math. She also couldn't shake the way he'd handed over the notebook, almost like he didn't expect it to matter. It ate at her. The school system had always had cracks, some small, some wide enough to swallow kids whole, but this felt personal, like the system wasn't just ignoring a bright student, it was stepping on him. Early the next morning, before the bell even rang, Ms. Alvarez marched straight into Principal Daniels's office. No appointment, no knocking, just straight in, carrying a folder and a tired kind of fury in her chest. "He's a genius," she said, planting Jamal's work on the desk without waiting for a hello, "and you all are crushing him." Principal Daniels, caught mid-sip of his coffee, sat silent for a beat. He wasn't known for emotion, just policies and rules, clipped memos and calm tones. After a moment, he exhaled slow through his nose and gestured toward the chair across from him. "Ms. Alvarez didn't sit. There's pressure from other staff. From parents even," he said carefully. "They want to know if he's legitimate, not just some internet trickster." "That boy doesn't need to prove anything," she snapped. "But he will, and not in front of the folks who already decided what he's worth." Daniels leaned back, then nodded slowly. "We'll bring in an independent evaluator. Academic, outside the district, supervised test. Results speak for themselves." Ms. Alvarez lifted her chin. "Fine, but he gets prep time. real time, and he chooses someone he trusts to be with him during all of it. Daniels looked at her over his glasses, then finally agreed with a quiet nod. It wasn't a victory. Not yet. But it was a door, maybe the first real one, and Ms. Alvarez was ready to make sure Jamal walked straight through it. Back at the East Side Learning Center, Jamal slipped into his usual spot near the window, surrounded by tall metal shelves filled with forgotten books and second-hand encyclopedias. The afternoon light slanted in through dusty blinds, casting soft lines across his notes. Normally, this was the one place where he felt steady, where his thoughts weren't interrupted by noise or doubt. But today, he sat there frozen, hands hovering over the keyboard of the old center laptop. It took him about 20 minutes just to type the subject line. He was writing to Marcus Rhodes, that quiet mentor he'd met 2 summers ago through a local STEM outreach program downtown. Jamal had been one of 5 kids picked for a week-long science camp run by black engineers and college professors. Marcus had led the last workshop of the week, something about designing low-cost wind turbines, but what stuck with Jamal wasn't the lesson. It was the way Marcus actually listened when he spoke, like it wasn't weird that someone his age wanted to talk about heat transfer and inequality in the same breath. They'd kept in touch for a while after that. Texts, a call here and there. Then school, life, and everything else got in the way. Now, months later, Jamal reread the message one last time before clicking send. He didn't explain everything, just enough. The challenge ahead, the test, the pressure building like steam in a pipe. He ended it with the one thing he hadn't said out loud to anyone yet. I don't know if I can do this alone. An hour later, a response popped up. It was short, just a few lines, but Jamal read them 3 times. I'll be there in 3 days. Get ready. This is yours. No extra words, no overthinking, just straight truth, firm as bedrock. Jamal placed the phone face down on the floor next to him. He leaned back against the shelf of old encyclopedias, the ones nobody touched, but that always seemed to hold the weight of things. And then, without any noise, without wiping his eyes, he let himself cry, not from sadness or fear, but because for the first time in a long time, the fight didn't feel like it was only his. When Marcus walked into the old learning center, carrying a backpack and that same calm energy Jamal remembered, the air in the little library seemed to straighten out. The room, which had felt heavy with quiet stress, softened a bit. Marcus didn't waste time with introductions or long speeches. I didn't come here to save you, kid, he said, setting his bag down and pulling up a chair. I came to remind you who you already are. Jamal let out a breath he hadn't, realized he was holding. Then they got to work. The next few days were a whirlwind. They met every afternoon, sometimes straight through the evening, until the lights flickered and reminded them the center was about to close. Jamal wrote pages of equations, some from the test prep packet Principal Daniels had approved, others just to stretch. They didn't call it cramming. It wasn't about memorizing tricks. It was about sharpening something that was already there. Sometimes Marcus would throw down a problem and just wait, watching Jamal figure out where to begin. Other times, Jamal would pause halfway through a calculation to explain how the math could be used in real life, like predicting how traffic patterns shift when a new grocery store opens in a food desert. Marcus listened, and then pushed harder. Still, it wasn't only about numbers. How do you feel about this test? Marcus had asked late on the second night, after they'd emptied a granola bar box and used its cardboard for a makeshift graph. I feel like if I screw it up, no one will believe anything I do ever again, Jamal said, honestly. Marcus nodded, then pointed at the notebook. But this is you. You don't learn all this to prove anything to them. You learn it because it's part of how your brain talks to the world. Jamal didn't answer right away. But he got it. Every new variable he whispered out loud, every quiet question he asked about applying limits and slopes to living systems, Marcus caught and jotted down in the margins of his own notebook. No one had ever treated Jamal's curiosity like it was something real, something worth keeping pace with. Each session didn't just make Jamal smarter, it made him remember he'd always been. On the morning of the test, Jamal woke up earlier than usual. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and his mother moving in the kitchen. She had ironed his best shirt the night before and laid it out on the edge of the couch, a pale blue button-up he only wore on important days. He tucked his favorite pencil, a slightly chewed number 2 with a small crack near the eraser, into his front pocket like a good luck charm. When he walked into the halls of Martin Luther King Jr. High, something felt different. The usual echo of footsteps and chatter was gone. Maybe it was just early, or maybe everyone knew today wasn't like the others. A few heads turned as he passed, but no one said a word. He reached the assigned classroom, room C12, which had been set up specially for that morning. No familiar posters, no signs of usual teachers, just a quiet space with 2 outside evaluators, a wide clock on the wall, and one plain desk waiting in the middle. Marcus was sitting just beyond the door, not inside, but close enough. He gave Jamal a small nod as he took his seat. The test papers were handed out. The silence was only broken by the ticking clock. Jamal barely looked at the first problem before flipping to the last page. It surprised the evaluators, who exchanged glances, but he didn't notice or care. He had always worked backwards, not because it was dramatic, but because that's how his mind made sense of things. He started by looking for the outcome and tracing its roots from there, working through the logic like some invisible thread pulling him through. The pencil moved steadily, even though his palms were damp and a line of sweat ran down past his temple. He didn't rush. He didn't freeze. Step by step, he laid out the answers, using tricks and visual shortcuts he'd crafted on his own. The math wasn't fancy. It was just real, clear, personal. By the time he finished, the scratch paper looked like a map, roots and side notes, crossouts and circled variables, but it wasn't messy, it was alive. He looked up, nodded once, and passed the papers forward. Jamal hadn't just finished a test. He had left behind proof, not of potential, but of who he was. The fallout after the test came fast. Within 24 hours, the external evaluators had sent their report to the district office, and copies landed on Principal Daniels's desk first thing the next morning. He read the pages once, then again, slower the second time. The evaluators had included notes in the margins, comments about the sophistication of Jamal's methods, comparisons to high-level college coursework, and speculation that the student might have unknowingly solved a version of a problem recently presented at a graduate conference. When the staff meeting was called later that day, the mood in the room was thick with that mix of curiosity and discomfort people don't know how to sit with. Ms. Alvarez arrived early, arms crossed, waiting like she already knew what was coming. Marcus showed up right on time, wearing his usual calm like a well-fitted jacket. Daniels didn't waste much breath on introductions. "I think we all owe this student some attention," he began, holding up the report. Then he nodded to Marcus, who took the floor without hesitation. Marcus walked them through the past month. The sessions, the long evenings at the community center. Jamal's way of working through logic, not to impress anyone, but to understand the world better. His voice never shook, but his words carried weight. He didn't speak in dramatic pauses. He didn't need to. The truth didn't ask for theatrics. People shifted in their seats. They remembered Jamal now, not just the kid who sat in the corner. but the one some teachers had dismissed, assumed things about, or passed over for group projects. And slowly, that invisible fog that had wrapped around Jamal for so long began to lift. Outside the room, things moved faster than anyone expected. Someone from a local education podcast had heard whispers about a gifted student fighting bias in the public school system. Within 3 days, a reporter from a city paper was asking for a quote. In the hallways, Jamal's name started sounding different, no longer said with doubt or dismissal, but with a kind of surprise, and for some, even respect. Meanwhile, Mr. Langley, his old math teacher, avoided meeting anyone's eyes. He kept his responses short in class, his usual confidence chipped and quieter. What looked like pride days before now seemed hollow, and maybe even he knew it. When Jamal walked through the front door that evening, the house smelled like his favorite, red beans and rice with baked chicken, the way his mom always made it when something big happened. He hadn't expected anything. In fact, he wasn't sure if he was ready to talk at all. But once his mom caught sight of him, she crossed the room in seconds, pulling him into a hug that felt like it came from years back, not just days. Jamal's dad soon joined, arms wrapping around both of them, no words needed. They sat down together on the faded grey couch, one of those quiet family moments where nobody needed to explain how far they'd come just to get here. His little sister Maya hopped onto his lap, wriggling until she found her spot. She looked up at him, her face serious in the way only 6-year-olds can be, and said, "I want to be smart like you." And that did it. Jamal didn't smile at the applause earlier that day. He didn't react much when the principal stopped him in the hall to shake his hand. But right then, in his own living room, hearing his sister say that with so much certainty, something opened up inside him, like for the first time he understood what all that hard work meant, not just for him, but for everyone who'd been watching quietly from the edges. The rest of the evening passed in warm pockets of silence and clinking dishes. Later, his dad helped clear the table without needing to be asked. His mom didn't hover, but she lingered near the kitchen as Jamal washed up, still wearing that quiet expression that said, "I see you now." Over the next few weeks, small shifts started happening at home. His father, who used to nod through parent-teacher meetings, began asking real questions. His mum started peeking into his notebooks, not to check for grades, but out of true curiosity. Even Maya began scribbling, pretend math problems on construction paper at the dining table, making him judge her homework. No big announcements, no sudden overhaul. But the house moved differently now, with purpose, with attention. Jamal's light wasn't something quiet anymore. It had filled the room, and they were all learning how to keep it burning. It started with a letter, folded carefully, no signature, no name, just a typed note and a single photograph attached. With a paperclip, the envelope was placed quietly into the mailbox of the South Oakland Education Alliance, the non-profit that handled student complaints and school oversight reports for the district. The director, Ms. Howard, opened it during her lunch break, and what she saw made her sit down without finishing her sandwich. The note was brief. "Someone needs to look into what's happening at Martin Luther King Junior High. This isn't just about testing." The photo attached showed Jamal's back, taken at an angle that suggested the person behind the camera was being careful, maybe even nervous. Several dark circles, some fading, some deeper, were visible underneath his shoulder. Blade. The skin around them looked bruised, uneven. It didn't look like an accident. Ms. Howard didn't wait. Within 48 hours, she met with the district's legal liaison, and the image was shared anonymously through the appropriate channels. But word, as it always does, traveled faster than protocol. Somehow the photo ended up in a parent-run Facebook group focused on public school advocacy. From there, it took less than 2 days before the image hit broader local networks. Families across East Oakland started talking. Conversations that used to happen in whispers about harsh teachers, unfair treatment, strange punishments, now came out in full sentence form. People who had pushed things down for years suddenly had language. They remembered incidents that never felt right and started organizing, showing up to school board meetings and demanding transparency. Mr. Langley, the math teacher who had long held a reputation as strict but solid, was now officially under review. The school announced a formal investigation into misconduct, citing new allegations and community pressure. Just a week before, his explanations had pulled weight. Claims of discipline, of pushing students to greatness, of waking them up. But now every word he said landed differently, hollow, scrambling. What once seemed like control now looked like fear dressed in a necktie. And while no one could undo the bruises or the silence that made them possible, something had changed. A foundation that had gone unquestioned for too long had started to crack, not all at once, but enough to let light in. After the story hit national news, there was no more room to pretend things were under control. The school board didn't get ahead of it fast enough, and the pressure forced Principal Daniels and the district leaders to call an emergency community meeting at Martin Luther King Jr. High. They named it a listening session, but everyone knew it was more than that. It was held in the gymnasium on a Friday evening. Every chair they set out was filled. Parents stood packed at the back wall, some holding toddlers, others clutching printed flyers demanding change. A few teachers sat quietly near the front, not speaking, just watching. News cameras were posted up near the stage, recording everything. At the edge of it all, Jamal stayed seated beside his mom, gripping her hand under the table. The speakers began with the usual scripted statements, acknowledging the news coverage, promising a third-party investigation and offering vague commitments. To review disciplinary procedures. Some people nodded, but most just waited. Then Ms. Peterson, the community center director who had been involved with Jamal's tutoring, got up to speak. Her voice didn't shout, but it carried. She didn't hold back. She spoke about generations of young people like Jamal, bright, overlooked, dismissed before they even had a chance to be heard. She told stories of quiet talent stifled by bias and fear. Her words had weight not because of volume, but because they were true. When she finished, the room was still. Marcus stood next. He didn't use a mic. He carried a folder, worn at the edges from use, and showed pages from Jamal's study sessions, the annotations, the solved problems, the scraps of brilliance that had been invisible to so many for so long. He said simply, "This wasn't a miracle, this was work, and we almost missed it because we weren't looking." People leaned in, quieted. As the evening wound down, the tension in the room shifted. No more dodging, no more vague promises. What came instead was a strange mix of regret and cautious hope, a realization that something deeply wrong had happened right in front of them, and they'd been part of letting it slide. But in that same air was a feeling that maybe it didn't have to stay that way. The following month, after several tense meetings and phone calls from both the school district and the state education board, Martin Luther King Jr. High made a public announcement. They were launching a new pilot program aimed at identifying and supporting students with exceptional academic talent. The press conference was held in front of the main office with banners that read, "New Paths, Honoring Every Mind." Standing, off to the side, barely in view of the cameras, was Jamal, quiet as always, but this time with his name at the top of the list. The program wasn't just about extra worksheets or tougher tests. It included one-on-one mentorship with volunteer educators from nearby colleges, weekly guided sessions with visiting professors, and something new entirely. Time for Jamal to work alongside younger students, helping them with math and problem solving. In small groups, it wasn't about turning him into a teacher. The goal was to let him be himself while making space for others to grow alongside him. Some folks didn't love it at first. At a faculty meeting, a few teachers raised concerns. They questioned whether the program distracted from the standard curriculum or gave special treatment. And a few parents quietly complained to the PTA, wondering aloud why just one student had been picked to start. But each time doubt crept in, something else showed up to meet it. Because while grown-ups debated, students noticed the change. Jamal, who used to sit alone near the back of the cafeteria, now had company. A couple of sixth graders pulled their trays up next to his without hesitation. Older students who once barely nodded at him in the halls started asking things like, "Hey, can you help me figure out this homework?" Or, "What would you do here during class?" He didn't talk more than usual, didn't try to act bigger than he was, but the way he listened, the way he explained things, simply without making anybody feel small, that started to shift how people saw him. For the first time, Jamal felt like more than just tolerated. He felt needed, and in a school where he used to blend into the silence, now his presence filled space in a new way, not loud or flashy, but steady, like something finally settling into place. As the changes started taking shape at Martin Luther King Junior High, the energy in the hallways felt different. Students who once just trudged from class to class began hanging around a little longer after the bell. Color started showing up on walls where there had only been dull beige paint for years. The school had approved a student-led mural project. Something small at first, just a way to reflect the stories of the surrounding community. But like most things touched by real care, it grew. Guided by Ms. Rivera, the art teacher who'd always believed students had more to say than anyone let them, the project became something deeper. A group of volunteers from every grade researched. Local figures, national heroes, everyday people who had made quiet history in one way or another. They sketched and painted every weekend for nearly a month. With input from staff and families, one long hallway became a timeline of sorts. Faces and stories rarely talked about in class. And right in the middle panel, they painted Jamal. Not front and center like a monument, but in profile, his eyes looking toward a sky full of equations, stars, and orbiting planets. There were math symbols painted behind his head like constellations. Above him, on a banner stretched across the top, it read, "See us clearly." On the day the mural was finished, Jamal didn't know until Maya tugged on his sleeve after school and said, "You're on the wall." He laughed at first, thinking she was making it up, but when he turned the hallway corner and saw it for himself, something in him paused. He stood quiet, hands stuffed into his hoodie pocket, staring. He didn't say anything at first, just looked, from the lines traced into the stars to the small, careful math notes painted near the edge of the wall. For a moment, it was hard to breathe. Not from nerves, but because he'd never imagined himself being seen that way, surrounded by faces like Langston Hughes, Mae Jemison, and Katherine Johnson. He didn't know if he deserved it. Maybe no one ever really feels like they do. But he understood something else in that moment. He wasn't up there just for him. That painting was for every kid who had been talked over, passed up, or told they were too quiet to count. It wasn't just a mural, it was a reminder. Jamal started spending his lunch breaks in the school library, not because someone asked him to, but because it just felt right. It began with one student, Carlos from 5th grade, who had trouble with fractions and didn't feel comfortable asking in class. Jamal had helped him once at a tutoring session after school, and Carlos showed up the next day at the library with a math notebook, pretending it was by accident. After a few minutes, they were working through problems again like it was no big deal. Then more students started coming. Word got around that if you needed help and didn't want to feel stupid asking, you went to Jamal during lunch. By the second week of this unofficial tutoring, there were 7 kids showing up regularly. Some brought math, others just came with their assignments and questions. They pulled chairs around the back table, talking in low voices and listening closely. They felt safe around him, like no one would laugh if they got something wrong. And he never raised his voice. He just waited, explained things patiently, and let them figure stuff out without pressure. Right up front, every single day, sat Maya. She had her pencils lined up, her worksheets clipped neatly to a folder with cartoon, stickers, and the most serious look on her face. Jamal joked that she was acting like his assistant, and she replied, "I am." Then she got back to pointing out a subtraction mistake someone made, like she was managing payroll or something. To Jamal, it wasn't just math. It never had been. What mattered was watching the quiet kids speak up after getting the right answer. It was seeing someone who used to avoid group work now raise their hand first. It was turning confusion into confidence little by little. He didn't feel like someone special standing in front of them. He felt normal. Normal in the best kind of way, like this was where he had always been meant to land. He wasn't looking for recognition anymore. He wasn't trying to prove anything. Each moment spent helping another kid connect the dots gave him something he couldn't quite describe. It filled the space that used to ache. It made the library feel less like a room with walls and more like home.